The next day, Jiang left his apartment and went to a forest. Then he took out a map, held it with both hands, and while looking at it, began to question which way was the right one. He wasn't sure if he had gotten lost again. At that moment, someone shouted loudly for help. Jiang, who was trying to find the way, started looking back and with a confused look began to wonder who was shouting. Behind him there was a giant tree. On the ground beside it there was a sword. At the top of the tree, there was a man with white hair holding onto a branch. He was asking for help because he was afraid of heights. Jiang turned around, started looking up, and upon seeing the man, he remained silently thinking. He decided to help him. He extended his hand towards him and used the ability called Growth of All Things, Vine. By doing this, several branches emerged from the ground and began to advance towards the man. Just before he let go of the trunk and fell from the tree, the branches wrapped around his body, preventing him from falling. Several seconds later, the man finally landed on the ground. He placed both hands and both knees on the ground, and while panting heavily, he explained to Jiang that he had been quite scared. He just wanted to save a bird's nest. He had thought that nest didn't seem high up, but upon climbing realized it was really very high. Jiang approached him, started looking at him, and while a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek, remained somewhat confused seeing that the man was afraid of heights yet still decided to climb the tree to save a bird's nest. He didn't know if this man was an idiot. The man stood up. He was an older man. He extended his hand towards Jiang and with a pleasant look thanked him for saving him and also asked what he wanted in return. Jiang, who was lost, asked the man if he knew how to get to the Tanjiao camp. The man turned his back on Jiang, and as he was walking away from him, closed his eyes and with a smile began to ask him to follow since he too was going to the Tanjiao camp because he had a task there. He put his hand behind his head, thanked him, and decided to follow him. Jiang started to follow the man, extended his hand towards him and decided to ask a bit about him. He asked him if he was also a job changer. He was somewhat confused since the man carried his sword behind his back instead of storing it in the system inventory. He started walking in front of Jiang and explained that he actually wasn't a job changer but just an enthusiast who liked practicing with the sword. He turned his head towards Jiang, started looking him in the eyes and with a cheerful smile, explained that when he was young, he didn't have the talent, and after failing to change job, he fought and struggled for almost 10 years and still wasn't even able to afford buying a bathroom in the city. At that moment he was completely desperate and ran to the mountains, found a small abandoned cabin, climbed on top of a table and prepared to hang himself. But when he looked to one side he saw a sword. Seeing this sword, the will to continue living returned in him. Since then, he began practicing with the sword every day on the mountain. Practiced drawing the sword for 20 years and fencing for 30 years, and then suddenly he had a revelation. He asked Jiang if it didn't seem incredible. Jiang, who was somewhat confused, responded that it was certainly something incredible. The man grabbed the sword with his hand, started looking at the ground, and asked Jiang if he wanted to learn how to handle the sword. He knew a special move. Just before he could say the name of the special move, Jiang interrupted him and refused. Upon hearing this, he put away the sword, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile thought that Jiang was a bit impatient. He decided to wait for the moment when Jiang would want to learn how to handle the sword. Jiang started looking at the sky, and upon seeing what had appeared, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. With a cheerful look, he asked the man to look and also asked him if that wasn't the Tanjiao camp. But to everyone's surprise, the man disappeared. Jiang started looking around and noticing that the man was not there. He became somewhat confused and began to wonder where the man was. He also thought that this old man was too strange. At the same time in Tanjiao camp, several helicopters started flying in the sky. At the entrance, there was a receptionist, and in front of the desk there was a huge line of people. He asked all geniuses who were going to enter the camp to first come and line up for registration. Each one would receive an identification bracelet which could not be removed unless one was eliminated. A man with black hair began to approach the entrance. A while later, it was Jiang's turn from Chu City. He received the identification bracelet and started putting it on his wrist. In this camp, Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandao were also present. They brought their hands to their chests, started looking at Jiang with a loving gaze, and couldn't help but start blushing upon seeing that he had also come to the camp. For Mu Hankyu, he was her master, and for Luo Sandao, he was her benefactor. Jiang couldn't help but feel somewhat confused as he didn't know what was happening. Being a benefactor was fine for him, but being her master wasn't. They two started to fight among themselves. With an aggressive look, they began to insult each other. Luo Sandow did not know why Mu Hankyu was calling Jiang love. She had advised her many times to read fewer romance novels so that she would not fantasize senselessly like men. Mu Hankyu responded that she was right. Now she really knew what true love was. According to her, Luo Sandow was nothing. While the two of them were fighting, Little Nine manifested herself. She took out a piece of watermelon, closed her eyes, and while she was eating it, explained to Jiang that she was enjoying watching the two of them fight. Jiang remained silent as this information was overwhelming for him. Lu Sandow began pointing at her with her finger and asked why she was so close to Jiang without any reason. Mu Hankyu approached him, grabbed his arm, started mocking Lu Sandow, and asked her to stop being so narcissistic since she wasn't following him. According to her, Jiang had the final say. Jiang did not say a single word. Upon seeing this, Lu Sandow began to point at her with her finger and with a mocking smile told her that she had said this a long time ago, and now it had come true. Mu Hankyu started touching the tips of her fingers. She began to look at the ground and explained to her that Jiang was very handsome. Luo Sandow approached her, put a hand on her shoulder, closed her eyes, and while laughing asked her if they were good friends again now. Mu Hankyu started to look at her and explained that she felt they were now both better friends and rivals in love. They could only be considered friend-enemies. Seeing this, Jiang began to sweat and thought that girls were very strange. At that moment, a loud bang was heard not far from them. Everyone started looking towards the direction of the bang and saw a curtain of smoke. As the curtain of smoke was disappearing, Jiang began to wonder what was happening. Luo Sandow started to look a little more closely and realized that someone was fighting. The same man we saw at the entrance of the camp appeared. He started rolling up his sleeves, clenched his teeth tightly, and with an aggressive look, began to ask who was fighting. Not everyone had entered the camp yet and someone was already fighting. He didn't know if this person was looking for death. Jiang, who was behind him, started staring at him intently and realized that he was the patrol instructor. He didn't know if the instructors had third-level strength. The instructor approached the place of the fight, but someone gave him a strong punch in the stomach, causing his body to be thrown backward. Seeing this, Jiang couldn't help but stay in shock. The instructor's body was thrown backward and fell to the ground. He put his hand on his chest, opened his mouth, and while bleeding, gave the order to the others to notify the superiors, as this was getting out of hand. Luo Sandow was left speechless upon seeing that a third-level master had been thrown into the air in a second. With a surprised look, she began to wonder who had hit the instructor. With a serious look, Mu Hankyu revealed to her that they were the standouts from Jiangnan's war zone. A woman with red eyes, who was wearing assassin clothes, appeared. She put her hand on her hip, started staring at the instructor, and remained silent. Her name was Tang Ying. She was an assassin. Her strength was extremely terrifying. She was the youngest assassin of Tianjilu. It was said that recently she had assassinated a great level 4 master in Sakura country. Another man who had red hair appeared, his body surrounded by powerful energy. He began to look at him and couldn't help but start smiling. His name was Bai Feng and he was known as the Little God of Death. He was a disciple of the chief commander of the East Sea Defense Line. He was the brightest and most promising seed in the military district but had psychological problems. He tended to lose control easily and turn into a demon. Another blue-haired man appeared. He extended the sword into the sky, began to stare at Jiang, and started to smile. His name was Xiao Beihan. His grandfather was one of the 7 guardians of Great Xia. He had the profession of Blue Lotus Immortal Swordsman, comparable to a divine-level profession. Luo Sandow began to look at Xiao Beihan with a terrified gaze and told Jiang that she knew this damn dog. The epic sword he had in his hand had been stolen from her house. Jiang began to look at him with a calm gaze, and upon seeing that he was Xiao Beihan, there was no longer any doubt in him that he was a prodigy since his strength far surpassed that of Xiao Yuanwu. The people did not know who was being attacked by the 3 together. In the middle of them there was a shirtless man with orange hair. He stood up, adopted an offensive stance, and prepared to attack. While the smoke curtain was disappearing, he clenched his fist tightly and decided it was time to counterattack. With a murderous look, he clenched his fist tightly, and using all his strength, gave a strong punch to the ground, breaking it into pieces. He was an invincible descendant. His name was Jiang Wu Shuang. It was said that he had 3 professions and all were unique and hidden. He was strangely strong since the 3 together could not defeat him. Mu Hankyu and Luo Sandow started to look at Wu Shuang with a surprised gaze. Even Jiang himself was shocked. as Wu Shuang was third on the summer ranking list. He didn't know if his little insects would be able to face this guy. At that moment, Xiao Beihan gathered momentum, jumped up, grabbed the sword with both hands and prepared to attack. Jiang looked up and seeing this, thought it wasn't good. Xiao Beihan landed on the ground, gripping the sword forcefully, causing the ground to start cracking. He was very close to Luo Sandao, but luckily Jiang grabbed her by the hip, jumped and dodged his attack. Xiao Beihan started staring at Wushwang with a serious look and praised him since his wind fist was very powerful. Jiang started looking at Xiao Beihan and caught his attention. Xiao Beihan began to sheath the sword, and upon seeing Jiang he was somewhat surprised. He had heard that he had been the one who killed Xiao Yuanwu. He drew his sword again, started pointing the tip towards Jiang, and while his body was surrounded by a powerful aura he began to stare intently at Jiang. Despite also despising the useless Xiao Yuanwu, today Jiang was going to die. Originally he had planned to deal with Wushwang first and then take care of an ant like Jiang. But since he was here, he decided to start with him. Jiang did not let himself be intimidated. He extended his hand to the side, releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist. With a look full of determination, he told him that although their strength was different, the Xiao family was really just as rotten at its core. Xiao Beihan extended his sword to one side and began approaching Jiang. Seeing this, Jiang extended both hands to the sides and prepared to attack. Although he had promised Uncle Jai Gang not to show his power, now there was nothing else that could be done in this situation. Luo Sandao, who was behind them, simply remained silent. Just before the combat could begin, someone launched a powerful slash towards them, which split the ground in two. This person ordered everyone to step aside as the Grand Instructor known as the King of the Celestial Sword had arrived. Seeing this, both Jiang and Xiao Beihan deactivated their powers. He began to look in the direction of the attack and couldn't help but start wondering who the King of the Celestial Sword was. This instructor was the same person that Jiang had saved from the tree. He extended the sword towards them and with a serious look, explained that if anyone dared to cause trouble before the camp started, they would have to face his sword. Jiang began to look at the instructor and couldn't help but be shocked and start sweating. He couldn't believe that the strange old man he had encountered on the road was the chief called King of the Celestial Sword. With just one movement of his sword energy, he had made the four great geniuses tremble until they were immobile. He didn't know if his small insects had also been destroyed by his sword's shockwave. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.